Those who know someone who went missing, what happened? I went to the same elementary school as Michael Donaghy. He was kidnapped off the playground and still not found to this day. I remember after it happened every parent showed up to walk the entire school of kids home. I also remember running ahead of the pack for whatever reason and all the parents were screaming at me to get back. They were terrified. My great-grandfather disappeared when his youngest child, my grandfather, was a toddler. Records were finally found, decades later, showing he had moved across the county, changed his name, remarried, and had additional kids. A friend from high school. She was skiing and got separated from her party during the day. Sadly, she was found deceased in a tree well. She died at 19. I still think of her often. She was such a bright light and had an amazing future. When I was a kid, a friend of mine was kidnapped by his dad. The mom got custody and the dad just showed up one day and took him. It was devastating for everyone, especially the mom and brother. Yeah, IDKY, he only took one kid. After about 5 years of police investigations and the mom having to change her legal name and go into hiding, they finally found him and got him back home. He was safe, but he was really quiet for a few years after he got back. I have no idea what happened during that time. What I do know is that he seems incredibly well adjusted now, and last I heard he's happily married. My nephew was born when his parents were 16. His father is Greek. Once they found out that the baby was a boy and they saw that he was the spitting image of his father, suddenly they wanted him. One day my cousin and I were watching him play in his kiddie pool and I told my cousin I'm gonna go get a drink. I was inside and heard her scream for me. I run back outside and my cousin is holding the baby. The family had tried to take him. When the police caught up with them, they said they just wanted to hold him. Yeah, okay. Turns out the parents had bought tickets to Greece. Guy I went to school with and kind of grew up around, his mom is one of my mom's best friends, went missing in 2010 on his way home. Police and search parties searched everywhere looking for him and his truck. He had to pass over a bridge to get to his house, so it should be noted that the lakes were searched by divers and dragging the lake as well. For years later, 2014, the water levels were very low and someone called in saying they saw a tire sticking out of the surface of the water near the bridge he would have had to cross to get home. It was him and his truck. At least the family got some closure after 4 long, excruciating years. Not me, but a poor old guy at Costco. This old guy, maybe late 60s, came up to me and said, "Jimmy, I think that's the name," he said. "Is that you?" I said no. His face sank. I talked to him for a bit. Apparently his adult grandson Jimmy vanished a few years before, and I looked just like him. He said the family had no idea where he is and hadn't seen him in years. He just up and moved away without telling anyone. The guy didn't seem like he had dementia or anything, just a grandfather looking for his grandson. This was a few years ago. I felt really bad for the guy. His heart probably got super excited only to be broken again when I wasn't Jimmy. I hope Jimmy eventually contacted his family because his grandfather seemed really sad about it. A neighbor's son vanished while jogging in our neighborhood. He was an avid runner and it was unlike him to not come back on time. Days turned into a frantic search involving the entire community. Unfortunately, his body was found in a nearby river. An investigation revealed he had been struck by a hit-and-run driver and his body was dumped to hide the crime. The perpetrator was eventually caught, but it was a devastating loss for his family. A friend went missing one night in June 2016 after a night out. He had an argument with his SO and wandered off on foot. Days went by, and there was no info. Find out, he'd somehow been hit by a car and died. He didn't have his wallet on him, so it took a bit for them to identify his body. No one understood how his significant other wasn't with him, or what led up to him walking off in what I think was a drunken state. A childhood family friend had a head injury from a BMX accident, and was most likely suffering from concussion or post-concussion symptoms. Went off into the wilderness, and his remains were found 3 years later. His dad spearheaded the search effort during those years. I think overall not knowing exactly what happened was hard, but finding his remains and getting to bring them home was really great closure. A friend of mine's sister went missing in the early 80s. We always suspected she was a victim of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. We found out a couple of years ago that she is in fact on his list of suspected victims. This was my friend's brother. He disappeared and his apartment had blood everywhere, as if from a struggle or suicide attempt. Years later, he showed up on his brother's doorstep and said he had been off living as a shaman somewhere. Who knows how accurate that is? They went on a wilderness hiking trip alone in Hawaii. They never came home. No body was ever found. As it turns out, this has happened in Hawaii to quite a few people over the years. I guess it is a more dangerous region than people generally understand. Guy in my town went missing. Older gentleman, his family said he took off walking with a gun. They found him just under a year later by some railroad tracks with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The family suffered that whole time. I was a 911 telecommunicator in moderately well-off, very low-crime county. I took the 911 call for a 16-year-old girl that went missing after she didn't come home from her morning run. About 9 hours later, I took a 911 call from the opposite side of the county. Guy claims girl ran up to him claiming she had been kidnapped by a guy in a white box truck. She described him as a middle-aged white guy, and in his truck he was making her dress up in wedding dresses to take pictures of her. He didn't physically assault her in any way, aside from the initial kidnapping. No rape, no violence, she claims he didn't even watch her change. Just wedding dress pictures. I have no idea if he was ever caught. Edit, spelling error, I meant other side of county, not country. Sorry about that. My uncle drove my cousins all the way across the country to visit my grandma, but then just up and left, without his children, a couple days after arriving, and then disappeared for several years. Come to find out, he had moved to the Philippines and started a brand new family over there with his brand new Filipino wife. He still won't talk to any of us, including his own children, even though we've tried contacting him several times throughout the years after he showed back up on Facebook. Douchebag. It's not someone I'm close to, but a guy I grew up with went missing from a music festival he was working at. Someone, or multiple people, told police that he abruptly told them he was going home. He didn't go home, he just disappeared. He got to the festival on a bike, but his bike was still there. A couple weeks later, he was identified as being a corpse found in a burned-out building the other direction from home. The case remains unsolved, but it is considered a homicide. The part about this case that bothers me is that I don't know whether the he went home person is telling the truth. Did he abruptly decide to go home because something scary happened and he just didn't get that far? Or was that person the one who put him in that burned-out building? I just kinda feel like if things were that bad that he'd randomly say, "I'm quitting and heading home." He'd just hop on his bike right then and there vs doing whatever came next that put him in the path of the people he was avoiding. When my cousin and her husband, and kids, went on a vacation to Curacao, around 35°C that time of year, a few years ago. The area is covered in thick jungle, and it was made clear to everyone who went there that you needed, or was required, to stay on the paths. He decided to go for an evening stroll while the rest stayed at their cabin. Took a 1-liter bottle of water and his phone with him, nearly no reception as soon as you walked into the bush, some gum, and went off path anyway, because he probably got curious. Search and rescue were busy doing their searches, along with volunteers, around a large area, and he was found 5 days after he went missing about 2 kilometers from where he went off path. He died from a heat-induced heart attack, but was probably already completely unconscious before that happened due to dehydration. He was 47. Goes to show you, when you are told not to go off path because people tend to get easily lost in thick jungle, do not go off path. It might actually kill you. A guy in my town disappeared into thin air one day. We looked for him everywhere, the authorities were involved, and he was later found 500 kilometers from home, wandering aimlessly in a psychotic stupor. Poor guy had too much on his shoulders, he's home now and he's fine, but I haven't seen him since. I worked with a young woman named Julie. She had a little girl and was in the process of splitting from her husband. She didn't show up for work one day, a no-call no-show. She was missing from that day forward. The ex had their daughter and had logged into her FB to make a message about leaving town with a new boyfriend. They found her car abandoned in a parking lot. The ex went on Dr. Phil, I believe, to do a lie detector test and proclaim innocence. Even though they have never found her body, the ex was actually found guilty of her murder. Sometimes I think about her and wonder where her earthly remains are. I hope she is found someday and her family gets to bury her. A friend of mine was driving home from another friend's house and never made it. They found his dog wandering around but never found his truck. He was missing for a year before the friend who he'd been visiting was arrested this spring for allegedly murdering him. My best friend. She was abandoned by her mother when we were in middle school, then her previously absent father reappeared and suddenly took her away. Nobody was able to get into contact or find their location. Basically disappeared into thin air. We reunited when we were 21. My friend had been in an abusive situation for many years. When she escaped, she had to lay low until she was sure she was safe and wouldn't be found. Only then could she reach out to me. A close family friend was missing for about 5 days. He jumped off a bridge to try to kill himself, but he was found below it. He broke a lot of bones and kept himself alive by using his shoe to lift water from the creek beside him to stay hydrated. My story much happier than many here, sad face. Around July of 2022, an old high school classmate of mine went missing. She was a mother of 2 boys, one of them with special needs. The last known contact she had with anyone was when she told a friend of hers she was going to the store, but she never returned. The police were informed, and a missing persons report was filed. Her phone and wallet were found at her home. A boyfriend she was dating was questioned and released without any indication of foul play. She's never been seen or heard from since. My friend and neighbor Nancy. One day, she just disappeared. She had her nephew living with her, and he was interrogated and found to be innocent. I found out through her sister that she was missing. I was worried because she was diabetic. She weighed about 98 pounds, tiny thing. This was in 2007, as far as I know she hasn't been found. All the links to her news stories are dead links now. IDK if it's the law or what, but my apartment complex kept her apartment waiting for her if she was to return for 4 months. I think about her from time to time. A friend of ours, he was a local busker. He played guitar and wrote his own songs. Just totally vanished. No one heard from him again. His parents and sister still ask every year, but no one has ever seen him. A girl from my graduating class in high school went missing 10 years ago. She had 2 kids and just was gone one day. She's still missing, so I really can't answer what happened. Her family, law enforcement, and the greater community have looked for her tirelessly. I hope we get answers one day. A dependable client of mine didn't show up to an appointment and we couldn't get a hold of her, so we charged her half of her service fee as per our company's policy. The next time I saw her, she apologized profusely and said she was in a diabetic coma and couldn't come to her appointment. We refunded her, obviously. In the 80s, the 17-year-old that lived behind us went missing. He was a bit of a troubled kid who we knew did drugs and hung around a bad crowd. There wasn't any internet and even local news didn't really cover those things, but we knew from school and the talk in the neighborhood. I still remember after missing for so many days I was listening to the radio and his sister called in a dedication of Somewhere Out There, that Fievel song that was popular at the time, and I was very young, but I remember being so sad during that song. He was found a few days later. He was executed in a field with his hands tied behind his back. I don't even remember his name and not sure if his killer was ever caught. I still think of his sister every time I hear that song. My cousin ran away when he was 16 years old, 1976. He learned how to get a new identity by watching a 60 Minutes US episode. I did searches from time to time during the early days of the internet. Way before Google. One day, his name popped up. I called the number, but the person did not know who or what I was talking about. I mentioned that I was his cousin and left my name and phone number. A couple of days later, he called me. Good conversation. With my cousin's permission, I reached out to his brother and dad. They all had hours-long conversations, and we all had a nice family reunion. My cousin had an interesting life and passed away last year. In my childhood, a girl in the community we knew, her mum went missing for a long time. The dad and 2 daughters were rightfully in distress, mourning for years. The dad even went on TV and pleaded for information. No one really knew how to speak about it. The disappearance was in broad daylight and seemingly a public area outdoors. Over a decade later they found the mum and she had taken her own life. The nature of how she disappeared had looked like a kidnapping unintentionally. One of my co-workers went missing for a month. They found him in the woods with his head blown off by shotgun. His family said he left the house that morning in the best mood they'd seen him in ages. Check on your friends. ESP, the depressed ones that are suddenly happy. I met Elizabeth Smart after she returned home after being kidnapped. We were both playing in the school orchestra for a musical, and her harp was set up near my drum set. We talked a few times, normally just about the music, and I never said a word about her ordeal. She was very nice and also very serious, professional about doing a good job in the ensemble. I hope she's doing well out there. My sibling ran away in the middle of the night summer before our senior year of high school. Woke up and saw they were gone, called the police and filed a report. Found out they had been picked up by one of their adult internet friends they met on Discord, and then flown across the country to live with their other adult internet friends. Was a total of 6 months before we could get them out of there, went absolutely radio silent for the last 4 months, and they ended up missing the entirety of senior year. Fortunately, they're doing well now. In 2015, one of the employees of the clinic at Yellowstone Lake didn't show up for work. This was uncharacteristic of him, so everyone who knew him was worried. Word spread very quickly. Most of us worked for Xanterra and didn't cross paths with other concessionaires workers very often. But most of us had a sense of community all the same, and we were concerned for him. He was found dead a few days later, killed and partially eaten by a bear. Few of us knew him firsthand. But he was still one of us. My brother-in-law snuck onto an airplane when he was 12 years old and flew across the United States. He also left a note for his family stating he ran away to California. 2 weeks later, they received a call from him stating he wanted to come home. Typical Wild HS jock kid sobered up, quit doing drugs, and started distancing himself from that old crowd. He went missing, and his parents thought he went off on a bender, then started to get worried a few days later. They found his body in their koi pond at their house when it floated to the surface in a more visible place. Dude fell off the deck, hit his head, and drowned. The body got stuck in a weird place under the deck and lilies. Not directly, but a friend's sister who studied abroad in Japan had her friend go missing. She and her roomie went to a party. At some point in the night her friend just went poof. No, hey, I'm going with these people. No, I don't feel well, I'm leaving. She was just gone. A fake, she wasn't found. The sister was still overseas when my friend and I lost touch, and both siblings left our hometown and deleted their socials, so while I can hope she found her way home, odds are she didn't. A not-so-close friend in the group of people I played Magic: The Gathering with. Really cool guy, worked as a climbing instructor and would occasionally drink too much rum and try to climb my roof from unlikely directions. One Wednesday evening, he was supposed to come over for some magic, and he just didn't. He didn't answer his phone, no reply on WhatsApp or on Facebook Messenger. We knew that he had broken his arm the previous week and was resting at home, so the number of possible scenarios was extremely limited. He lived in a different city, none of us knew how to contact his roommates, and his family was all on the other side of the world. He showed up again 4 years later. I still don't know the full story, but as far as I can tell he'd been an alcoholic for some time. He tried to harm himself that day, and was involuntarily hospitalized for 2.5 years and couldn't contact the outside world, and afterwards he was moved to some rehab and still couldn't contact the outside world. Pretty terrifying fate, to be honest. On the bright side, he's still a really cool guy even without any rum. Girlfriend of my ex's bandmate went missing a few years after they broke up, but we were still social media friends. She had been posting worrying and weird word salad stuff on social media, mostly MySpace, which will tell you how long ago this was, before she vanished. She didn't show up to her mother's remarriage, and we were all disturbed by how her mother claimed she was likely just throwing a tantrum over the wedding, rather than seeing it as the massive red flag it was. We organized a social media Find This Person group to share her missing poster and asked everyone who had any info to contact local police. She was spotted a few months later in another major European city. Turned out she had bipolar disorder, and in a manic phase, flew on a whim to another country. She was safe, and came back. Trying to be vague with details, but I wanted to share a story of someone who came back. My mom was in the same Girl Scout troop as Amber Hageman, the girl in which Amber Alert is named after. They spent the 4 days it took to find her putting up posters and searching non-stop, where she was eventually found in a ditch. Unfortunately, her abductor was never found. Went and visited my buddy at his college for a weekend. We were partying Saturday night, and this one dude comes up like, "I've had 15 shots. Should I go for 20? And showed us the tally marks he put on his arm to keep track of the drinks. 3 months later, that same dude's truck was found flipped on the side of the road in a heavily wooded area. His body wasn't with the truck, and to this day they never found him. Was like 12 years ago. I was friends with Erica Baker and her brothers when I was little. We rode bikes together since they lived right down the street. It was absolutely terrifying when she disappeared. The neighborhood was thought to be very safe. She was out walking with her dog one day and never came home. The dog showed up back home without her. It's assumed she was abducted, but she was never found. Unfortunately, pensive face. I was a little blonde girl just like her, and I'd ride my bike alone all the time. I had less freedom after that. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.